Welcome to Sex Positive Gaming. I'm Annie, and one of the most frequent questions I get is from people who don't know a particular flavor or have specific questions about the nature of a flavor. So I thought I would touch upon 20 of the terms and flavors I have mentioned so far that people have had questions about. This list is by no means comprehensive, and some of these terms can actually be really complicated. I will cover them in more detail as I release new flavors of the week and more in-depth breakdowns. First up is corruption. This flavor focuses on taking established social sexual norms and mores and removing all limits. It can often be overblown and almost cartoonish like a Jim Butcher novel, but that's often the case when you deal with aesthetics. This can manifest in many ways, including excessive sexual interactions, body modifications, drugs, clothing, BDSM, and power exchange. Speaking of BDSM and power exchange, they are two terms that I get asked about a lot. Power exchange basically means that there is some type of power imbalance in a sexual relationship. This can take many forms, including employer and employee, family, mental impairment, or anything else that might impact consent. Not that fictional characters can consent. BDSM is a type of umbrella term that covers bondage and discipline, dominance and submission, and sadism and masochism. These three topics cover actual real-life consent because, unlike fiction, consent can only ever be between things that can actually, consent. I could do a whole video just covering BDSM, but think of it as the application of consensual power exchange. Next up are trainer and atomy. As I covered in my History of the Trainer genre series, these two flavors branched off from each other in the mid-1990s. Both involve modifying the behavior of romantic interests. Trainers tend to be more active in this behavior modification, while atomy games tend to be more subtle. Next up are the harem and the reverse harem. Both of these involve collecting a group of potential love interests. Sometimes the potential partners are willing to share, and sometimes you get the game school days. The only difference between a harem and a reverse harem is that in a harem the main character identifies as male, and in a reverse harem the main character identifies as female. Why aren't they just both called harem then? Because life is always fair and things always make sense. Speaking of not making sense, next we have femboy and tomboy. A tomboy, as many of you know, is someone who identifies as female and acts in a way that is considered masculine. Yeah, I know that people can identify however they want and act however they want. I'm not the one creating these terms here, just trying to help explain them. Anyways, the opposite, the inverse of that is the femboy. That is an individual that identifies as male and manifests in a way that is considered feminine. This is tricky because YouTube and some other communities treat femboy as a slur, so be aware. I mean, both are flavors regardless of the terms we use, so if there are better classifications, I'm happy to start using them and getting yelled at by YouTube less. Speaking of classifications that YouTube hates, let's talk about Futa or Futanari. This one is pretty straightforward, but there is a lot of confusion surrounding it. Futanari means having a functional set of both male and female sex organs. While this is a Japanese term meaning dual form, it is a cross-cultural socio-religious concept that has existed for millennia. Now, if an individual changes their gender identity with or without changing their sexual organs, that counts as trans. Trans and Futa are two separate flavors. I understand that for many there is a preference overlap, and I know that many people feel very strongly about this. Once again, these are not comprehensive descriptions, just an attempt to help people learn about these terms, like Futanari, that occur in fiction. While we're on the subject of change, let's talk about the transformation flavor. This is another one of those covers a lot of things. It could be body modification like piercings and tattoos, or it could be turning into a giant space hamster. As long as the character appears dramatically different before and after, you're probably dealing with transformation. Speaking of giant space hamsters, let's talk about furry and monster girl. I've talked before about there not being a clear line of demarcation between the two, to which I received quite a bit of pushback. Both represent anthropomorphic sapient characters. In the past, furry tended to appear much more animalistic, but as more and more communities cracked down on the, let's call it the appearance of animal interaction, Furry characters now tend to look very similar to their Monster Girl counterparts. While we're on the subject of monsters, I guess I need to bring up vor. This flavor is short for vorophilia, and it revolves around the concept of consuming or being consumed. Talk about adversarial dating. At least you can be sure that one person will end up paying for the meal. This is another YouTube no-go and is technically classified as a mental disorder, but most flavors fall under the paraphilia branch of mental disorders. I'm not shaming. Remember that homosexuality was classified by the American Medical Association as a mental disorder until 1973, and listed in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders until 1987. Heck, the World Health Organization only removed trans from being classified as a mental disorder in 2019. Fictional flavor outlets reduce actual sexual violence just like violent video games reduce actual violence. So even if YouTube and other communities are actively suppressing healthy outlets, they are actually the ones actively making things worse. I know that may be a lot to swallow, but then we are talking about vor. And lastly, I'm going to cover cheating, sharing, cuckolding, Nedorade, and Notori. Those of you who are familiar with this family of flavors are shouting, "No, Annie, don't do it!" because there is a very vocal and very passionate community of advocates both for and against these flavors, who I fully expect to participate in the comments with kindness and decorum. Cheating is pretty straightforward. That is a sexual interaction outside a relationship that is without the permission of one's partner. Sharing is a sexual interaction outside of a relationship with the permission of one's partner. Cuckolding is sharing where the partner who gives permission also derives sexual pleasure from observing or being aware of the interaction. This is also sometimes called cuck-queening if the observer is female, for I'm pretty sure the same reasons that we have harem and reverse harem. Great, glad that I could clear that up for everyone and there's nothing more to see here. Oh yeah. So, Nedorade or NTR loosely translates from Japanese as to take someone away by sleeping with them. But wait, what is the difference between a harem and NTR then? It has to do with the main character. Are they being stolen into another relationship? Is their partner being stolen? This usually involves a female being stolen by another male. Should I be using such an objectifying word like stolen to describe this scenario? I'm trying to keep this short and simple. The biggest difference between this and cuckolding is that in NTR, the original relationship usually ends. As for Notori, the main character is the one doing the stealing. I know, still a poor choice of words. Don't worry, this week is Flavor of the Week NTR, and next week I'm going to do a deep dive into the origins of NTR. Why is it so popular, and why so many people have such a strong response to it, positive or negative. There you have it. Hopefully this helped answer some of the questions you may have had about various flavors. For those who disagree with my explanations, let me know. Do you at least think I helped point a person in the right direction? As the channel continues to grow through the support of my patrons and those of you watching, I plan on tackling each and every one of these flavors. Yes, there are some flavors that I'm not allowed to talk about, even on Patreon, but hopefully with time and understanding, we'll eventually be able to have a dialogue about all the flavors, their value, and their impact. After all, isn't that the heart of no shaming, just gaming? Thanks to all this month's supporters on Patreon. I wouldn't have been able to do this without you.